Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes just for the last few people to join. So just going to be quiet for a moment and then we'll kick off. But we'll be starting in by 5 past latest. Hi everyone, thanks for waiting a couple more minutes. Looks like we've got majority of people on, so we're going to get going so we don't hold up too much of your day. So welcome to our From Cloud Chaos to Cloud Control webinar. We've got Cloud Practice Lead Mark Southerton and Cloud Architect Don Morris doing the webinar today. They'll be covering how running cloud environment is often sidelined, the impacts of this, the costs that can incur, plus best practices on how you can optimize your cloud estate effectively and make it perform. As Mark and Don go through today's webinar, any questions you have or would like answering, just pop them in the chat box or using the chat sections that you'll see in the panel on the right hand side. They'll go through this at the end, so there's some question and answer section at the end. So anything you do want to ask or any questions throughout, just pop them in there and they'll ensure that they'll answer them at the end. So enough from me, I'll pass you over to Don and he'll kick things off.
Hello everybody, I am Don Morris. I am the Cloud Technical Architect here at Claranet. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about the Cloud Optimization Assessment and its ins and outs and how it might benefit you. So just very quickly, flipping over to our agenda. We're going to do some introductions. We're going to talk about different cloud journeys. We're going to talk about the Cloud Optimization Assessment in more detail from a technical aspect and a business aspect. We'll discuss what good looks like. How can you identify a good assessment from the many offerings that are out there? And we're going to run through a sample assessment with a customer whose name has been changed to protect their identity. And then we'll close off with some final thoughts and a Q&A. So jumping right into it, once again, I'm Don Morris, Azure Architect. I am joined this morning by Georgie, who is our Digital Marketing Executive. However, missing from our ranks at the moment is Mark Southerton, our Cloud and BizApps Practice Lead. Mark is unable to join us this morning, but fear not, I will be covering his content. And so if at any point during the presentation it seems like I'm just reading somebody else's slides, that's because I am, but we will get through it together. So who are we? We are Claranet. We are a multi-disciplined managed service provider and consultancy. That means we dip our toes into various flavors of cloud, networking, storage, data, AI, co-location, workplace. We do a whole lot. I think the most interesting thing about us is probably that we're privately owned, especially considering our size. It means we're not really beholden to the quarterly whims of shareholders. We're allowed to be very strategic and very flexible, which I think makes it quite an interesting place to work. We have various accreditations from the likes of Microsoft and AWS and have done since 2016. With more than enough time for us to find our feet and pick up a few tricks along the way. So The cloud optimization assessment. We're going to get into how this might benefit you, and the ways it'll benefit you are really dependent on your cloud journey. That means how you got to cloud and where you are in your cloud journey, striving towards some utopia. I don't think we always know exactly what that is, but we know that things should always be better, perhaps, than what they are now. So we're gonna cover a few groups, a few different ways that people have reached the cloud. And the first group I'll talk about now is the transition group. This is a group that has done a lift and shift migration from a data center or another cloud, or from a data center or private cloud into public cloud. They've probably been chasing the promise of agility, scalability, and reduced cost. But unfortunately, they've essentially swapped one platform for another without really changing any of their habits. They've moved to the cloud perhaps with mixed records of success, and I'm willing to bet that the migration has probably not left a good taste in everybody's mouths, and the business may have even soured on cloud as a result of a bad migration. So keep that in mind as we move through the optimization assessment. You've done a migration, it maybe hasn't gone perfectly according to plan, or you at least acknowledge that things could have gone better. The other group we could talk about are the early adopters. They are more progressive, they adopt technology quicker and maybe with a higher degree of skill because they have the people on board to do that. They have skills and resources that lead them to successful adoptions. They know things aren't perfect, they know where the gaps are, they're fully aware of their ever mounting backlog, but the business usually has other ideas for this group. They will be moved on to deliver wins in other parts of the business, and while they're doing that, they may be taking their eyes away from the cloud environment and allowing it to perhaps degrade. And lastly, we have the evolution team or the organic growth team. This is usually a small team of highly technical people, but they're spread across multiple areas of the business, and they're very dependent on external help to manage their cloud and keep things under control. So we have these three groups, and they've all arrived at the cloud in different ways. They all use it in different ways, they all manage it in different ways, but what do they have in common? And I think the chief commonality running through them is that while they aren't looking, the cloud seems to have grown a life of its own. They wonder how they can get to grips with their estate, while business pressures mean they need to be ever leaner and they need to focus their efforts on winning business and delivering wins for the business. So they don't have the time or the momentum to take cloud optimization in their stride without losing pace. That work is always starting from zero. And so they wonder how they'll get ahead of problems before the next big fire, and they're wondering how they can get their cloud estate back into a good form. So if this sounds like you, or you're just curious to see what we're all about, I think you'll find this talk useful. So what is a cloud optimization assessment? Well, for a start, I think one of the key takeaways from the previous slide is just how tricky it can be to stay on top of your cloud estate in the face of changing business priorities. But once things have strayed, how do we get back on track? Where do we even start? And I think that's where a cloud optimization assessment really shines. Its chief goal is to provide insight, and that's going to help you establish and maintain long-term control over your workloads. But to explore how it does that, it's probably best to break it down into its two chief components. It has a technical component and it has a business component. So we'll start here with the technical component. Now, technically, an optimization assessment should do one crucial thing. It should measure your environment against the guidelines set out by your platform provider. And these are more commonly known as the well-architected framework. Now, your engineers, your suppliers may have their own insights and opinions, and that's brilliant. But ultimately, we're looking for guidance from the very top. And nobody knows more about the platform than the people who built it. And so vendors like Microsoft and AWS take all their hard-earned lessons and they distill the most important insights into the well-architected framework. It forms the baseline by which all environments can be measured. Now, there's a lot of information within frameworks. We're talking best practice, guidelines, principles, rules, standards, and assessing these can be a really tricky undertaking. But to make things a little easier, providers tend to categorize their recommendations along several pillars, and you can see those on screen now. They are reliability. Is the platform resilient, available, and recoverable? Cost optimization. How are you getting the most value out of your cloud investment? Operational excellence. Are workloads managed effectively? Performance efficiency. Does resource capacity meet demand without over or underutilization? And security, which is which safeguards are in place to protect the cloud platform. Now, if you look around, you may see another pillar, sustainability. I know AWS has it, but Microsoft, for example, has dropped it. My suspicion is because it's uncomfortable talking about sustainability when you're redlining your data centers with generative AI workloads. But if we set that aside for the moment, and for the sake of consistency, we'll focus on these 5 pillars. These are going to form our key baseline by which we measure all environments. So with the technical aspect aside, we can talk for a moment about the business aspect. So when we're talking about frameworks and optimization, these can't only exist as objective technical standards. You know, how will I know that I'm optimizing along the right lines? How do I know that my recommendations are even plausible? And so the most important thing an optimization assessment should do, and I'm not convinced enough providers do this, is it should get to know you and your business. It should understand your priorities. For example, do I spend more time focusing on cost optimization because you've already wrapped up a large security project and you would like to understand the costs associated with that? It's imperative that an assessment provides the right sort of insights to inform your decision making, and it'll struggle to do that without getting to know you first. And to expand on that point, assessments shouldn't just be about the bad. The other way these should help your business is to validate what works. A good assessment will praise areas that comply with or even exceed best practice standards. So you know what works and what's worth keeping based on an independent validation. And for my final point on the business aspect, you should remember that you're not only benchmarking yourselves. These are a great way to benchmark service providers. Most MSPs and consultancies have some flavor of an optimization assessment. And this is a fantastic way to sample their service and expertise and gauge their approaches to problem solving. So if you are going to go out there with this benchmarking goal in mind, we can offer some criteria that can help you spot a good assessment from the sea of offerings out there. So as I've just said, optimization assessments are an extremely common offering in our industry. They may pose under a different name: a health check, a WAF review, an infrastructure assessment, an efficiency analysis. You get the idea. You will be in a field of options, but how do you separate the good from the not so good, right? And I think this all boils down to the provider and their capability. For example, you want a provider who is multidisciplined. While there is inarguable value in pure play specialization, you're only ever going to get advice down a single avenue. And even if that isn't the case, that a pure play provider may only be able to remediate along a narrow line in-house. Multi-cloud and multi-discipline providers have deep expertise in security, networking, data, and more. And these can all be drawn upon not only during your assessment, but are extremely useful for remediation following it. So let's say you found a provider who can advise and remediate across multiple domains. The next criteria to serve as a good assessment are the degree to which these are automated. Look, we all love automation. It makes our lives easier. It makes us more productive, and it's a vital tool in the toolbox, but it is absolutely not the whole story. An engagement that is more consultative may take a bit longer, and it may even be slightly more expensive, but it is going to give you insights that are tailored to the needs and priorities of your business. Fully automated assessments can only offer advice along narrow, predetermined paths, whereas a consultant, architect, or engineer can apply nuanced expertise as they work, and that is extremely valuable. And that leads me to the final pitfall to look out for, and that is assessments that just take too long. This to me means a balance between automation and consultation hasn't been properly struck. Ideally, you should have results within 5 days, depending on the size of your environment. And by this time, not only will you have a firm idea of what your provider is all about, but you'll have all the answers you need to start acting quickly. Short engagements get results fast. Now, of course, Do I think we've hit the right balance? Of course I do. But in order for me to evidence that to all of you today, I'm going to run through an example of we're going to follow a customer through our assessment process. So on the screen now is broadly our approach to assessments. And to better understand each phase, we're going to follow a customer through them. So who are we going to follow? This is based on a real customer. We haven't just made this up. We have, however, changed the name to protect their identity, and we're going to call them Acme. So who are Acme? Acme have been running in Azure for a few years now. They are PaaS heavy. They've developed a cloud native IoT, that's Internet of Things application in the cloud. And as so, they have heaps of technical skill, but they're a small team and they're reliant on external help to keep things going. And to that point, they have an existing MSP, a managed service provider, but the relationship has taken a bit of wear over the years, and they're eager to get another opinion on the Azure estate as they plan for an expansion into a new region. And so they've approached us for an assessment. So what is the very first thing we do? Ask them to get the checkbook out? No, the very first thing we do is we qualify the engagement. Is this the right product for them? We are a consultancy-based business, and that means finding the right fit for each customer is extremely important. We're not going to sell something that doesn't hit the mark, because that's not going to help anybody at the end of the day. So let's consider Acme's situation. They have a cloud estate. That's a really good start. They want to make sure everything is running as well as it can be before they expand into a new region. That's smart. And there's a looming distrust of their current service provider. That's interesting. Taking all of that into concert, this sounds right to me. It sounds exactly like the sort of thing many of us would do. We would seek out a second opinion before we embark on a new, perhaps risky journey. So we're good to go. Once we've established that the cloud optimization assessment is the right product for them, we can assign a cloud consultant and schedule in what I believe to be the most important part of the process, and that is our workshop. Now, I know some people recoil in horror at the mention of a workshop. It conjures up memories of drawn-out technical chats and whiteboards with inscrutable diagrams on them. That is not what this is. We'll ask for no more than an hour of your time, and we see this as an opportunity to ask a few questions that help us form the initial understanding of your cloud strategy. Why did you move to cloud? What sparked you to seek out this assessment? What are your areas of architectural focus? And so during our workshop with Acme, we learned more about their worsening relationship with their MSP. I won't say more than that, but what I will say is that any WAF pillars under their remit are going to be under increased scrutiny from me during the assessment. We learned about the drivers behind their expansion into another region. This is being driven by a new customer who has very strict data sovereignty requirements. So that's really good to know. And we also learned that they have a sophisticated and very proud corporate security center who manages network and endpoint level platform security. So while security isn't exactly crying for attention in terms of assessment, we're certainly going to cast an eye over it. Trust and then verify is the mantra. And lastly, they also expressly stated that disaster recovery isn't a concern for them at the moment. So as we move into our assessment phase, we already know quite a lot about Acme, and we can make some educated inferences to help establish the focal points of our assessment. So I'm going to focus most of my time on areas that their MSP may be dropping the ball. And to me, that always screams cost optimization. We're all like this. We'll take a lot of rubbish from someone if it means that they're saving us money down the line. And I have a very strong feeling that this just isn't happening here. We're also going to focus on operational excellence because these are the sorts of things that are going to help them expand safely and efficiently. And we're going to obviously cast our eye over security because it's critical, but I'm going to think about, are there any dark corners that their corporate security provider perhaps isn't looking in? That's my angle. And reliability. Although they said DR isn't in scope, I will not sleep at night if I don't at least look at zonal redundancy and backup coverage. So I'm definitely going to look at that. And so armed with that knowledge and with reader access to the Azure estate, I will then kick off the assessment of their environment. So where do we start? Well, I like to start my assessments by understanding the contours of the estate. I see this as a teasing out of the initial design principles behind their landing zone deployment. And so I'm going to ask myself, what does the network look like? Where are the points of ingress and egress? How is traffic filtered? How are resources organized? How do they interact? How are they governed? This is going to give me a really good topological view of their estate, and that's going to carry me through the rest of the assessment. So once I have that mapped out in my head, I will then tackle each WAF pillar in turn according to the priority we've determined during the workshop. And so what does that mean? Well, to start, I am going to review the output of the platform advisor tools. These should absolutely not be dismissed or scoffed at. They get an enormous amount of effort put into them, and they're going to give you a lot of valuable information. Now, the trick is in passing that information. Not everything will apply to your business. The remediation steps may not be appropriate, and they may not consider the wider impact of change. But these are things that we'll look out for and translate for you in the report that we'll generate off the back of this. So we'll combine the advisor tools with vendor documentation, and we all know there's a lot of that. And we will also look at automation, and we all know there are a lot of cool tools out there. Anything we can do to make this more efficient and more streamlined is going to be good, because there is a lot of ground to cover, but we're still going to approach this from a consultative angle. So we take all the information from the advisor tools, documentation, automation, anything we can get our hands on, and we create a tailored set of findings and recommendations, and we present these back to you in the form of a report. This will be presented in a 1-hour session. This session is usually more popular than the workshop because everybody's eager to learn what we found. So speaking very briefly on the report, this will be about 20 pages long, depending on our findings and the material we've used to illustrate our points. That said, we rarely overshoot that page count, primarily because our aim is to turn this around in about 5 days. And our goal is to provide helpful insights and not just a deluge of mundane observations. So like I said, we'll turn this around within 5 days, and within the report, you will probably find at the top an executive summary that will contain 3 to 5 key findings that we believe are worthy of top billing. So we've sent you the report. We're going to let that sit with you for a couple of days, maybe even a couple of weeks, depending on our finding. But eventually, you should absolutely expect us to get in touch. So why do we do that? One, we want to gather feedback. We want to know, how has the process been for you? Has it helped? Can it improve? But more critically, we're going to ask, do you need help implementing or just further discussing any of the recommendations we might have made in the report? And that's exactly what happened with Acme. And so I'll spend a brief moment talking about how they got on during our assessment. So this is their report card. Obviously, we hit each pillar during the assessment. But these are the ones we chose to highlight in the executive summary of the report. So for a start, we found that cost optimization was in dire need of attention. My hunch was right. We observed good tagging standards, and good tagging standards help you make sense of billing, but that's really where the positives ended. Despite consistent usage throughout their environment, they were hardly using a zero reservations or savings plans. And to me, that is just leaving money on the table. In fact, some of the resource SKUs they were using didn't even qualify for reservation discounts. And this just does not paint the picture of a proactive FinOps service. And that was further evidenced by the sheer amount of orphaned resources we found throughout their environment. But apart from that, we also made some broader architectural recommendations. I'll touch on this briefly. They had 3 non-prod environments, dev, UAT, and staging. Everybody complained that they were slow, and a lot of people complained that they didn't use each stage. And so we worked with them to condense those 3 environments into a single non-prod environment. That helped us reduce complexity and take advantage of economies of scale. By the end of our cost optimization project with them, we managed to secure savings in the thousands per month, and that made us very popular indeed. Moving on to operational excellence, we'll remember their ambition to expand into a new region. So this is obviously a focal point to ensure that our expansion is controlled and governable. We found that they had what I called an exemplary IAC implementation. It was probably one of the better I've seen that hadn't been controlled by an MSP. The code was easy to understand. There was hardly any drift, and everyone was using it very diligently. So this is really going to help them going into the future. But I had to offer some help. And so what we did find was they had a really flat hierarchy of resources, and there was not any governance or policies to keep the environment under control in the long term outside of IAC. And so as part of the recommendations in our assessments, we provided diagrams and example resource hierarchy structures and samples of Azure policies that we felt would be beneficial. And we also highlighted a few soon to be deprecated services that they were unaware of, and calling them out early has given them plenty of time to plan ahead. And closing off on the security front, we'll remember their security overlord. Well, they were great. They had a very comprehensive view of the entire environment, but I did manage to surprise them. We found a host of vulnerabilities in their Azure container registry images. It turns out nobody was scanning them because everybody thought the other guy was doing it. So we managed to flag that up, and that made me very happy. And apart from that, we also proposed a few architectural changes to further secure their PaaS workloads by introducing things like private endpoints. Without burning too much time on that, this is just a small way to make the cloud a little less fluffy by keeping traffic encapsulated in your own private virtual network. And they were very receptive to that idea, and we're working through that architecture at the moment. So that's their report card. I am being reminded that we probably don't have a huge amount of time remaining, so I will stop there in terms of the assessment example. So as you've seen, hopefully I've demonstrated at least that the cloud optimization assessment is a fast and agile approach to reviewing your cloud infrastructure. It'll provide you with a view of what you have and where it could be streamlined. It's also a really good opportunity to get another set of expert eyes on your environment. Who knows what we might uncover? You don't know what you don't know, but we're going to go in and we're going to do everything we can to find it. And that includes praising things that your business does well. It's really good to validate all the hard work you've done and all the discipline that you have in your own teams. And we're going to find that, and we're going to help you shout about it. So that takes me to the end of the scripted portion. I will hand over again to Georgie to cover off any questions that we might have received.
Thank you, Don, for that. And as mentioned by Don just there, we've got a couple of questions that have come in throughout. So I'll ask these now. There's just 3 of them at the moment. Any other questions that you do have, feel free. You've got a bit more time to add them in. If not, if you think about something at the end, feel free to email us. We'll be handing around the recording of today's webinar, as well as Don's slides there as well. So I'll be popping over an email to you all. Any questions that come off the back of it, either reply to that or email us directly. Okay, so I'll start with the first question. So what level of access do you need to our environment?
So I will just need reader access to the environment. There may be an additional requirement for a billing reader access. I know that exists in both Azure and AWS. That's going to give us a little more insight into your billing and reservations and allow us to offer a more robust set of recommendations.
Great, thank you. How long will an assessment take?
We've touched on this. The assessment should take between 3 to 5 days, certainly not in excess of 5 days, depending on what we find. As I said, we want to get results back to you quickly. We don't want this to languish for weeks or months and have everyone forget about it.
Great. And then the last one, a slightly longer one. How in depth will the report be? Will you flag critical issues we need to solve, or just make recommendations?
So the report will do both. It will definitely flag critical issues, and those will be raised to the top. And we're also going to make broader architectural recommendations on how the environment can be brought closer in line to best practice, or where we see something that we determine is a little funky. We're gonna offer a way for you to bring that in line with what we consider to be best practice. So yeah, it'll do both.
Great. That was the last one. But as I say, everyone, any other questions that you do have, feel free to send them over to us. As I mentioned, we'll be sending around the slides and the recording of today's webinar. So just respond to that or get in touch. Finally, just to say a big thanks from myself on behalf of Claranet and from Don and absent Mark. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Cool, brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.